Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about British values, and instead of having a cup of tea, I'm having to have a cup of lemon sip. My voice, you might have noticed, is a bit croaky because I'm not feeling great. Throat is in a lot of pain. My nose is blocked. My sinuses are all like swollen. So it's lemon sip time rather than a cup of tea. But come join me with a cup of tea or a hot chocolate or something. Anyway, not as tasty, but it does the trick, eh? So we're going to be learning about British values in this short video. So British values comes up in paper 1 and paper 2. That's because there are two British values that are relevant. Well, actually, more than just two. All of them are relevant to paper 1 and paper 2. So just revise them for both papers, okay? That is my word of advice. So the way to remember British values is the acronym DIRT, okay? And I'll get back to that in a second. Let's talk about why British values were introduced, okay? And what briefly they are. So British values are aimed at creating a sort of collective identity among British people. And the reason why it was introduced mainly was because of the threat of terrorism. So ISIS were active at the time when it was introduced in 2014 under the Conservative government under David Cameron. And there were young people who were born and raised in this country who were travelling to Syria to fight for ISIS and to support them. And so the government was worried as to why this option was so attractive to these young people, despite them being born and raised in Britain. So they were concerned that maybe these young people didn't have that attachment to Britain. So they needed to come up with some values to ensure that these young people did, you know? So that was one of the main reasons. Another reason was the increase in migration, which led to a sort of like a national debate around migration and whether people from other countries felt British as much as they did their other identity, okay? And obviously due to multiculturalism as well, to ensure that there was a collective identity and a bit of integration and an understanding of what it means to be British, okay? So it was introduced in 2014, and schools were told that they need to promote these fundamental British values. So this is what they are. The acronym is DIRT, D-I-R-T, okay? So please remember that when you're revising, okay? So the first one is democracy. D stands for democracy. That's the first British value, democracy, okay? Let's talk about how the UK is democratic, because you'll be asked about British values. Maybe in a 1 or 2 mark question, you might be asked what a British value is, but you might be asked in an 8 mark question to justify to what extent a British value exists in the UK. So let's look at the reasons why the UK is democratic. Okay, so firstly, we vote for representatives to represent our points of views in positions in their positions of power, okay, which means we live in a representative democracy. We vote for people to represent our views and speak on our behalf, okay. We also use direct democracy every now and then. Direct democracy is when people are directly involved in decision making. So things like referendums, like the EU referendum, the people were asked whether the UK should leave or should remain. Also, we have freedom of the press. It means the media can hold decision makers to account if they've done something wrong. That is a fundamental feature of a democracy. We have a multi-party system. We have lots of political parties to choose from when we vote. We don't just have one political party like in China. And it means that people have more of a choice. We also have secret ballots, which means that we vote in secret. You know, you go into these little cubby holes. No one sees who you vote for. No one can tell who you're voting for. You don't feel threatened or under pressure to vote for a person, a candidate, or a political party. We have free and fair elections, which means we're not forced or threatened to vote for someone who we don't want to vote for. We are free to go and vote. We're free to choose who you want to vote for. And we have regular elections that take place, on regular basis, not every 30 years. You're not under the rule of one person for a long time. We have a constitutional monarchy, a monarchy that no longer has the power that it used to. It has handed most of its power to Parliament. So those are a lot of the reasons why we have a democracy. We have freedom of expression. We can join pressure groups, we can join protests, we can sign petitions, we can express our views about political issues online without facing any criminal charges. All of those things make the UK a democracy, okay? However, some may argue that actually the UK could have a better democratic system. And you might look at arguments like the House of Lords is a part of the legislative body that is not elected in, it's not democratic. So to what extent does that uphold the value of democracy here in the UK? First past the post system does not represent the views. It's not a very fair electoral system, does not uphold the views of everyone. So again, to what extent is that of value in British society? Might be looking at the role of the monarchy. Yes, we've got a constitutional monarchy. They don't have as much power as they used to because Parliament has that power, but they still exist. Also, you could talk about newspapers aligning themselves to different political parties and therefore having a lot of bias and not necessarily providing neutral information, which could influence citizens to vote in certain ways without properly being informed. Okay, you can use Brexit as an example of misinformation. You can use the Cambridge Analytica case studies. So yeah, lots of reasons for and against why some people might believe that Britain is a democracy, but why the system might need developing and need to be made even better. Okay. Right, what does I stand for? It stands for individual liberty. Okay, and that's basically just another way of saying that in the UK, in Britain, we have rights. Okay, a range of rights. We have human rights. Those are our fundamental, basic rights for all human beings. We have rights as employees. We have rights as consumers. You can return clothes after a certain number of days and so on. We have legal rights. So we have all these rights that protect us, protect citizens and give them freedoms, okay? However, on the flip side, you can argue that actually this is not a fundamentally British value because, our rights are limited to a certain degree. Not all our rights are absolute. Many of our rights are qualified. Your right to privacy can be taken away if you're being stopped and searched, or your home is being searched, or fingerprints are being taken, or CCTV footage as you're walking down the street. In certain situations, your privacy is taken away. Okay, so not all rights are necessarily absolute. They are qualified. R in our DIRT acronym. So R stands for Rule of Law. Okay, so rule of law is the idea that no one is above the law. The Magna Carta 1215, which was signed in 1215 by King John, and the barons forced him to sign it, is an example of this. The Magna Carta made sure that the king did not have as much power as he used to and would have to run things by the barons in order to make certain decisions, okay? And yeah, people in power are constantly held to account here in Britain and face penalties and punishments based on the law. You can look at case studies like Partygate, for example, and Boris Johnson. But some people also argue that actually it's not always the case. If we look at certain civil cases like defamation and libel cases, it's only usually the rich that take, the wealthy take other people to court for defaming their names because they can afford to take them to court for that. Criminal cases, people get free representation, get legal aid, but not necessarily with all sorts of civil cases. So therefore, you'd have to be quite wealthy when it comes to civil law cases, you'd have to be quite wealthy to hold people to account. if they breached civil law. So it's not always, rule of law is not always existent in the same way. Also, legal aid is not available to everyone. So certain people would not be eligible to get legal aid and might not be able to afford to fight a case. You might also argue that richer, people from more wealthy backgrounds are able to access the law and trials and cover costs. They can also settle disputes with money that someone who's less well off would not be able to do. Okay. On the flip side, rule of law could exist because we have the right to a fair trial, fundamental human right, and it exists. We do. The UK state provides free representation for people who can't afford a barrister in criminal cases. Okay, but like I said, it doesn't apply to civil cases as well. So that's a critique of rule of law. And the final one is T for tolerance. So that stands for tolerance and mutual respect for people of different backgrounds. So different religions or faiths and backgrounds. Okay, that's a long one. Okay. It's a bit of a mess there. There we go. Tolerance. T for tolerance. Okay. And again, yes, we've got migration that's been going on in this country for thousands of years. Okay, before Christ. So there is a level of tolerance there. Certain areas have experienced more migration than others, and you can see real integration taking place. People eating each other's foods, its impact on fashion and language and culture. And so, yes, there is a huge amount of tolerance. But on the flip side, some people might argue that there isn't a huge amount of tolerance. We have had recent riots from right-wing extremists who are outwardly racist, who believe that migration should end, that certain people from certain backgrounds be deported. So to what extent does tolerance exist? We've had the Black Lives Matter movement. That's an example that showing that tolerance might be our goal, but we're not there yet. It's not yet a fundamental British value. You've got the rise of Islamophobia since 9/11 2001, which also challenges this idea of tolerance in Britain. So, and the fact that actually there are certain parts of the UK that have been affected hugely by migration, certainly since World War II, but there's also parts of the UK that haven't at all. So there hasn't been opportunities for integration and tolerance. So lots and lots of critiques of all of the 4 different British values, looking at the positives and the way in which they are British values, but also looking at the fact that actually they're not yet British values. We might be on the way to ensuring that they are one day, but at the moment we can't call them British values. And other people also argue that these are not just specifically British values. You've got countries around the world that uphold these values as well. So it's not specific to Britain. So make sure you revise the reason why the British values were introduced, what the British values actually are, to what extent each of these British values are British or are values that Britain has achieved. That's all, folks. See you next time. Remember to like, remember to subscribe, remember to leave comments on which videos you would like me to record next. See ya.